The herd is finally coming to Cardano, but it's probably going to come in a few different waves. Ready? Let's go. We're in the last 400 meters of a marathon we've been running for years. And while this isn't the end of our Cardano journey, we are about to experience some brand new waves of adoption washing up on our shores. Okay, let's start out by taking kind of an expansive view of this whole Cardano journey. This is time zero. This is the Alonzo Hard Fork Combinator event, right? Gogan, when we get smart contracts. And this is some arbitrary point in the future, but a ways in the future, a couple years. So from time zero, right, like the founding of Cardano until now, we've basically had this like block of activity that has just been speculative investors, right? Speculative investors. And for all of us, we've really been like super crypto early adopters, right? Like a lot of us were probably very, very into crypto to even understand what Cardano represented. And some of the rest of you were probably just really smart and you figured it out. But speculative investment, and let's face it, that's going to continue forever. There will always be speculative investment. It's the bedrock of capital formation in crypto so far. So we've got speculative investment. Recently, we've had some other interesting activities, right? Just before now, and I'm sure continuing forever into the future, we've got NFTs. We just barely got NFTs. And that's going to continue into the future, probably forever. There will be many use cases for NFTs. Right now, it seems to be highly focused on things like art, but I do believe that in the future, we will have role-based NFTs that do some amazing and very cool things. We have also recently had the introduction of identity, right? And identity is similar. Digital identity, I should call this a digital identity, will also be used for many things and will continue far into the future. Digital identity can do cool things like the Ethiopia identity solution for education. That's going to be important in the future, especially if this current regulatory trend we're seeing in the developed world, where we see politicians with increasing frequency, getting in front of cameras and saying, we need to regulate the crypto space. The one path for cryptos to survive that regulation is to use digital identity to do KYC, because the big hammer is going to be this whole money laundering thing and protecting investors, right? We don't want money laundering and we want to protect investors. And regardless of how authentic those concerns, the relationship of those concerns to the actual reason for the regulation, it's probably going to come with those labels. And digital identity can help us with both those. So, and we'll have, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of discussions. We've touched on in the past, but we'll have a lot of discussions going forward about things like KYC and whether or not regulators will try to impose non-accredited investor rules, things like that could drastically change the face of capital formation in crypto. But the possible paths to survive those things for any crypto project, a big theme in those survival paths could be digital identity. So I think we'll see a lot of digital identity stuff. Right now, we've got Lex Friedman, mainstream attention, right? So Charles just went on the Lex Friedman podcast and reported on his Twitter that it was over a 5-hour podcast. Lex Friedman's podcast, while let's face it, he is an MIT artificial intelligence researcher. So, This is not the kind of podcast that my mother listens to, but it's a lot closer to mainstream than a typical crypto audience, which despite if you're immersed in crypto all the time, like a lot of us are, or partially immersed in it, crypto feels pretty normal, but it is not normal. We are early adopters. Most people have no idea what a blockchain is, what it does, what cryptos want to do. None of that. They don't know what's going on, right? We're early adopters. We are not a mainstream audience. Lex's audience is much closer to mainstream. And we could see crazy things. I mean, just this chain of events where Charles goes on Lex's podcast could lead to Charles going on Rogan's podcast. Think about this for a second. If Rogan wants to have somebody on from the crypto world, he's got Andreas Antonopoulos, who he's had on, I think, a couple different times. I think I've watched all of his appearances. Is it 2, 3? I don't know. And Andreas is great. But after we get past Andreas, who is Rogan going to have on? Vitalik? Vitalik, I don't know if a Vitalik Rogan conversation could go on for like 3 hours and be super entertaining, because I don't know if Rogan could relate to Vitalik, right? Vitalik has some fantastic thinking about crypto in general, and he's done some amazing things. But I don't know if Rogan would be able to relate to Vitalik to the tune of like a 3-hour conversation. Probably he could. He would figure out how to do it. But when I think about, Rogan's a great interviewer. He would figure out how to make that work. But when I think about that podcast versus the Charles podcast, like you put Charles in front of Rogan and they're going to have an entertaining conversation. If Charles goes on a blitz where he starts talking about, revolutionizing access to the financial rails in the developing world, Rogan is going to eat that stuff up. And because he's going to say it with a passion that I don't think we would see out of Vitalik, I think Rogan would be able to relate to it. So I think there's a chance, I won't say how much, but there's a chance we could see Charles on Rogan. I know Charles keeps saying it's easy, it's going to happen, right? He's always said Rogan after Gogan, but it's a big deal. If Charles goes on Rogan, it's a big deal. A very, very large audience, obviously smaller now that Rogan's on Spotify. A lot of he used to have all the episodes on YouTube. Now they're just on Spotify, but still, it's a gigantic audience. So we've got this mainstream attention that's kind of brand new. I mean, I never saw Charles on a podcast as big as Lex's. Now we've got crypto podcasts that are over 1 million, but not a podcast over 1 million with a much more mainstream audience like this. We've also got something that hasn't quite come yet, but it's going to very soon. And that is here. DeFi. So, you could argue that there's certain things going on and you could kind of paint them with the DeFi brush, but let's face it, there are a ton of projects dependent on the smart contracts that we provided by the Alonzo Hard Fork Combinator event and Gogan. And they're just sort of building right now and waiting, and they cannot wait to make their appearance. For instance, check out this infographic from Coin98 Analytics. It breaks down decentralized exchanges, non-fungible tokens, initial DEX offering platforms, payment, Oracle, synthetic assets, liquidity aggregation, derivatives trading, lending, and borrowing. So when you look at this infographic, the really interesting thing to keep in mind is that Cardano hasn't really even launched yet. We're not even to Alonzo. Look at all of these DeFi solutions being built on Cardano. This is a huge amount of developer excitement. Over here on the left, sure, Ethereum's got more, but they've had smart contracts up and running for years. Cardano doesn't even have smart contracts running, except for last Tuesday on the Alonzo Blue testnet, we ran our first smart contract. This is incredible for a project that hasn't even launched yet. We've got a lot of DeFi in the works. And if you think about the volume of transactions on Ethereum, think about the huge chunk of that that is related to DeFi. We don't have any of that going on Cardano yet. And that's all about to change. As soon as the Alonzo Hard Fork Combinator event, I don't know which of these projects will be up and running on day one, but they're all shooting to be up and running as soon as they can. And they're all going to be open for business, right? They want to make some money. They want to make some ADA. So they're all going to be welcoming customers and doing transactions. And we've covered it a million times here, but the fees are going to be so different. The fees are going to be so different to use DeFi products in Cardano than in Ethereum. I think we could probably replicate this infographic and in a year or two and size the icons in terms of how much volume they're doing on the Ethereum side and the Cardano side, and it's going to be even more impressive. But we've got this giant wave, this giant tidal wave of DeFi about to wash up on the shores of Cardano Beach, and it's going to be good to watch that rolling in from our perspective, guys. We haven't even touched on what hopefully will be the biggest wave of adoption that really hasn't hit crypto in general yet. So it's something that this and this and this will all play into, right? And we don't know when it's going to start. We actually don't know when this is going to start. Let's draw it like this, right? And it's also going to go on forever, but it's a big question mark when this piece of it starts. And that thing is real world smart contracts, not DeFi. So we're all excited about DeFi right now because that's such a big chunk of the smart contract sector, in crypto in general, right? That's a lot of what's going on. But that's not what brought us to crypto. When we first heard about crypto and got excited about it, DeFi wasn't what got us all excited about it, right? I mean, DeFi is really interesting when you look at the way, the tri-coin architecture of the stablecoin system, that like AgeUSD uses and that Professor Kiais wants to use to as a stablecoin to pay the fees in Cardano. When you look at stuff like that, it's really interesting. It's really intellectually satisfying to understand how the mechanics of those kind of systems work. But what got us excited was the whole, and that is a form of what got us excited. But what really got us excited was the idea that these smart contracts could take the place of the legacy systems, in real world things, real world disintermediation of middlemen. How come every time I want to transact in anything of value, there are all these professionals taking a chunk of the purchase price? If I buy a house, there's like a half dozen professionals and they're each getting a little tiny bit. Really, I just want to buy a house from somebody else or sell a house. How come whenever I have to do anything legal, there's got to be this like attorney, right, involved telling me how to write the contract? It's like anytime we transact things in the legacy system, somebody is getting some middleman portion of that. And DeFi does solve some of those problems. Obviously banks are some of the biggest middlemen taking a piece of all your financial transactions. But there's a lot of other like real world kinds of transactions. And it's not all just disintermediation. There's a lot of cases where we just want more efficiency. We want to be able to connect with other human beings and transact value in some way more efficiently. Like right now, if I want to go out and find a professional to help me at X task, whether it's a coach or, advisor of some type, it's like a little bit tough for me to do that. I have to go, maybe I go on Google and I search for whatever type of expert I'm looking for. And then I would have to, get in touch with them and negotiate with them. How come there's not just a smart contract that says, hey, this is the smart contract to connect people in the market for this type of expertise with people who actually have that expertise? And here's a rating system with on-chain reputation that you can rely on. And, the smart contract is going to create a curve, between the demand and the supply of that level of expertise as determined by the person's online reputation. And you can get a reliable fix on how much this person should be charging you. So there are a million different examples of this, and it's not even necessarily disintermediation. It's just a more efficient way to do things, and digital identity could play into that. NFTs, role-based NFTs could play into that. And of course it's all going to be fueled by speculative investment, like everything in crypto and equities and the entire financial industry is. And we're also going to need the mainstream attention. We're going to need Charles to go on the Lex podcast of the world, right? And DeFi is going to have to exist for all this to happen. But we haven't even really entered this real world smart contract phase where we're doing non-DeFi smart contract stuff, not DeFi, not NFTs, real world stuff, right? It's like, if I'm like traveling in Asia and I like trip and knock a tooth out or something and I have to have like emergency dental care, it's like, what do I just open up Google and try to search for a website in English about dentists in that country? Do I like ask some random person on the street who's a good dentist? Do I just like drive around, like find addresses of dentists and then walk into the shops and interview them? There's got to be a more efficient way to structure that. There was just like a smart contract for dentists, right? And there was this notion of, digital identity for that dentist and, kind of on-chain reputation scores that I could rely on so that I know that this is going to turn out to be a good expert or service provider, whatever I'm seeking, so that I could just go into the smart contract, say, hey, I'm in this town. Here is a dentist that holds a, role-based NFT that, grants them access to this smart contract, and they have on-chain reputation. And I can also, like escrow the money for the service they're about to provide to me, the emergency dental care. And then it'll be time locked so that they know they're going to get paid for doing the procedure. And I know they're not going to screw it up because they only get paid if they do a good job. This is a much more orderly way to structure this whole event and this transaction for those services. That piece might seem really far off because we're like totally awash in NFT and DeFi talk, but I think it's actually not that far. And that's the piece that I'm really excited for. Talk to you tomorrow.